podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the 1865 match report on the weekend where a dour game saw Nottingham Forest defeated by Wolverhampton Wanderers in a game that was decided by two spot kicks. Ruben Neves was successful with his penalty, but Brennan Johnson saw his effort saved by a one-handed Jose Sarr in the Wolves goal. Coming up, we'll talk about a lack of cutting edge, we'll talk about refs and VAR, and we'll also have the latest news roundup from Callum. But first of all, the team news, and Forest saw one change from the team that had acquitted themselves with a decent level of aptitude against Aston Villa, and that was the injured Serge Aurier was replaced by Nico Williams at right back, and Lewis O'Brien was poorly, so unable to take a place on the bench. So the Forest first team was Henderson in goal, Williams, Cook, McKenna and Toffolo across the back. We had Freuler sitting in the number 6 position with Yates and Kouyaté playing alongside him in midfield. And we had Johnson and Gibbs-White on the wings with Emmanuel Dennis up front. Now, I'm joined by Steven. Steven, you're feeling a little bit croaky today, so I hope that you'll be able to make it through today's podcast. But we'll talk about a few of the key facts in a minute. But just before we do that, briefly, how did that defeat make you feel? I mean, to me, it felt quite disheartening.
It did for me too. At the end of that 90 minutes, just felt deflated again, and it did feel like a opportunity gone begging from Forest's point of view. Now I've had the opportunity to sleep on it, I don't feel quite as down as I did at 5-5 yesterday afternoon. But I think there are still areas of the game where I do feel a bit sort of down and a bit disappointed about, but other areas where Forest actually didn't do as badly on the day as perhaps it felt in the moment, and there are some positives to take away from the performance. And I'm hoping that even though we lost, it's another step in the right direction in terms of not conceding as many goals and a bit more time that the teams had to come together and more cohesion being built between the players.
Yeah, we'll talk about those kinds of ups and downs and whether things are moving in the right direction or not. Like you, our original plan was to record this on Saturday evening, but events overtook us slightly. And like you, I feel slightly more measured and calm than I did last night. Let's talk about what happened in the game. So, first of all, it's been years since I've been to Wolves, and they have a lot of pyrotechnics and a lot of pre-match build-up, and also the other thing is that I found it surprisingly hostile, the atmosphere, actually. In the lead up to the match, I was discussing with the Maradon the Midlands, and he was reminding me that his brother has been beaten up twice by Wolves fans. So maybe I just had this impression in my mind of them being more friendly than they are. I don't know. But going back to the actual match action, Forest actually probably had the first chance of the game. It was from a corner. It was a back post header from Scott McKenna, but it went harmlessly over and hit the roof of the net. I think it's fair to say, Stephen, though, that generally in that first half, Forest were very much on the back foot, similar to how they were pinned back a little bit in the second half against Villa, would you say?
Yeah, it was a game where Forest struggled to really get out of their half and trouble the Wolves defence and the Wolves goalkeeper. Stories were this week that the Wolves keeper had a wrist injury. To my first impression there was just shoot on sight and at least pepper him with some shots and test him. But we didn't really do that. We never looked like doing it in the first half. It seemed that Forest were content to sit there and try and catch Wolves on the break. But we were even struggling to do that. I don't remember many opportunities that Forest created in that first half. And there was a spell where I think about the 30-minute mark, where they came into the game a bit more, looked a little bit more threatening. But again, Wolves came back towards the end of that half, and I was sat there watching, thinking, right, let's just get into half-time and hope it's goalless, and we can go again in the second.
Which, of course, we did, but I would agree with you. I think from about sort of, I think it was about 34 minutes to about 42, Wolves had this kind of period where they switched it on a bit, and their threats were coming down the wings. So obviously, Adama Traore, look, Bruno Lage has gone, and that's given Adama Traore a new chance that it didn't look like he was going to have at Molineux, and so he's taking that chance, and so the ball was played out to him. He's strong, he's powerful. Luckily for us, his end product is really variable, but he did put some dangerous balls in, and that led to Ryan Aït-Nouri having a header, which he, like McKenna, put kind of harmlessly over the bar into the roof of the net. And then Aït-Nouri also got played through, I think it's Mateus Nunes, played it through, Diego Costa dummied it, and Aït-Nouri put it well wide in the end. It looked way closer in real time than it was. And then the onslaught continued. Costa had an effort which he put just wide, but the offside flag had gone up anyway. And then the most dangerous moment was when Max Kilman, who's an absolute giant of a man, he headed it off the post, hit the base of the post from another cross by Traore, and Henderson was able to kind of gather the rebound. So we're really under the cosh for those sort of 10 minutes or so, and Wolves had really turned up the heat. Now, I think in the interests of balance, for all that Forest were getting battered then, it's worth pointing out that there was a potential shout for handball, which I completely was unaware of at the time, but Forest had got the ball on the left-hand side. Emmanuel Dennis had played it through. The ball had come across the box, and Nico Williams hit it on the volley from 20 yards, and it went wide. Now, that's fine. I saw a couple of Forest players appealing, and a corner was given. And then, having seen a replay, it did hit Totti's hand. Now, two things to say. First of all, VAR had a look at it and did not refer it to the ref. They said nothing to see here. Secondly, what's your opinion, Stephen? Was it worth a shout, and were you surprised that nothing came of it?
It was worth a shout, but I wasn't sat there raging that penalty hadn't been given. I could see why the Forest players were appealing, but I didn't feel that, certainly at the time, I didn't feel that it was enough to say that it was definitely a penalty. About half an hour later, I think I'd changed my mind slightly when VAR and handballs came up again. But I didn't feel it was enough of a shout at the time, and perhaps on reflection, it probably wasn't. But again, it's VAR, and there does seem to be inconsistencies in how the rules are applied and how decisions are being made.
Okay, so having established it was 0-0 at half time, let's move on to the second half. And it's relatively early on in the second half when Wolves again went for that tactic of getting down the right-hand side. And this time, Traore, flanked by Toffolo, blocked the route outside. Gibbs-White sent him inside. But Traore is the kind of player who is okay with that. He came in, had a go with his left foot. The ball deflected wide. From where I was, I couldn't see what happened. Initially, I thought I was expecting to see the net bulge. Then when it went wide, I thought it was Henderson saved it. And then the corner was given, and then the corner was held up because on the screen it said VAR check and for handball. So we could only assume from where I was in the ground that, yes, it had hit someone's hand on the way through. And sure enough, VAR spent ages looking at it and then referred it to the ref, who spent ages looking at it. And of course, naturally, that meant that fans around me were saying, well, if it's taking that long, then it's not clear and obvious, is it? And later on, when I was able to get online, you'd said exactly the same in our WhatsApp chat, hadn't you?
Yeah, I'd been watching the decision being made and the how they loop on the coverage. They loop that moment over and over again. It had been watched by the VAR team in Stockley Park. It had then gone over to the referee. He'd done the same thing. Watched it on a loop a couple of times. Eventually made the decision. So yeah, my feeling was, well, if they're taking that long, it's not clear cut. So you can't give the decision. You go with the on-field call. And when you look at I can see why it's a penalty, because Toff's arms are just out slightly as he's turning away from the ball. But when it's taking that long, I don't see how they can give it. And I then had the feeling, well, if that's been given, then perhaps Forest should have had one in the first half. So
I mean, Gary Lineker was making the point that, of course, what they do is, and I think Ashley Williams making the point, what they do with VAR is they slow it down, and that kind of means that you're not making as natural a decision, because it does make everything look more obvious, I suppose. So in real time, it was difficult to call. In slow motion, Toff's hand moved out from the shape of his body, and I think that's because he was trying to turn his body at the time. So I don't think it's not fair to say it was an unnatural movement or a deliberate effort to deflect the ball, but it did hit his hand, and so in that respect, that's why the ref and VAR chose to give it. I guess if you're comparing it with the Totti handball in the first half, the argument you could make is that Toff wasn't very far away from the shot when it was made. Maybe, I think, a case of, about 4 yards, 5 yards, whereas the ball came quite a long way to Totti before it hit his hand, but Totti hadn't moved his hand, if you see what I mean. So, I don't know. Let's just say that Steve Cooper, in a rare moment, did comment upon the ref in his own inimitable way, and we will talk about that later on. But anyway, the penalty was given. Good penalty by Neves, wasn't it? I mean, considering that he's just come back into the team, he's playing for a team who've got the lowest amount of goals scored in the entire, league divisions, only scored 3 all season. But he kept his nerve and he slotted it into to Henderson's right. Henderson went the right way, and we know that he's able to save penalties, but there was no saving that one, was there?
No, it was a nice strike, well taken, and Ruben Neves, he's just such a good technician, isn't he? And he can shoot from distance, he can take set pieces, and his penalties are really good as well. And that was just too good for Henderson to save, and well struck with conviction, and which might well have helped Forest out a bit later, as I'm sure we'll talk about.
I will just say as well, I'm a big fan of Neves as a player, and having missed a game through suspension, you could see how important he is to the Wolves team. Like, even if not everything he did came off, he is very much, bearing in mind that they've got João Moutinho, who's also an absolute baller and really experienced. But you can see that Neves is really the kind of the heart of that team, can't you?
Yeah, the way that the play goes through him, and he just knits it together for them. And he's the kind of player that I think any team in this league would love to have. He's just so good on the ball, and he makes it look very easy as well. He's one of those type of players. I'd love to see him in a Forest shirt, if I'm honest. And from our point of view, it's a shame that he has just come back from injury now, and he couldn't be back next week or a little bit later, if I'm honest.
So let's move on from there. Now, about just over 10 minutes after the penalty went in, Forest did make their first changes of the afternoon, and they saw Emmanuel Dennis go off. Now, Dennis had a couple of nice moments, but I say Max Kilman in particular is a very, very large individual, and Dennis looked tiny next to him. And the nicest moment I guess he had in the second half was when It looked like Kilman was going to beat him to the header, but Dennis just kind of stuck his foot out and flicked it past him to break past Kilman, who isn't massively quick, certainly not as quick as Dennis. And this was one of many, many moments when I think the decision-making of attacking players was a bit poor, and we will dissect that in a little bit more detail soon. So Dennis came off, and Czech Kouyaté came off, and Orel Mangala came on in midfield, Jesse Lingard came on, and Brennan Johnson moved from the right wing to the number 9 position for a bit. Now, in that time, I would say that Forest did make a difference. Did it make Forest better? I don't know. Did it add a different dimension to Forest's play and therefore unsettle Wolves a bit as they were, lacking in confidence and trying to defend the lead? I think it did unsettle Wolves. So Lingard was on the left, Gibbs White was on the right. There was a nice moment when Lingard broke through, and just when you needed some composure from an experienced player, he got his left foot entirely underneath it. And if he just played it across at ground level, basically a square ball, and Gibbs White would have been running onto it perfectly. But he lofted it, and Morgan had to run off and try and rescue it. So I would say that Forest, any moments of attacking intent from Forest were generally undone by a lack of composure and poor decision making. How do you feel?
That's spot on, really. It's a common theme. We get so far up the pitch, and then these moves fall away because we lack the killer pass, we lack the final ball, we lack a finish. And we're getting so far, and the quality just isn't there at the moment. And I'm hoping that this is something that comes with the team gelling and players getting to know each other a bit better. But it's frustrating because we're getting ourselves into good positions and pulling together some good moves at times, but it's all coming undone with that lack of quality, and that end product at the moment just isn't there. And it's like we're half a second off the pace sometimes in our attacking moves, and it causes these opportunities to break down. And if we're being clinical about it, then Forest have got to get their act together in this area, because it's going to cost them games. Yeah. We're not scoring enough goals to win games at the moment. I'm glad that we've stemmed the goals flow, because that needed to be done, but it's come at the cost, I think, of the goals that we were scoring, and we now need to find that balance again and find our composure and our quality in front of goal, because at the moment it's just not there.
Having said that we're struggling to make chances, we got gifted a chance. So it was a corner put in from Gibbs White on the left-hand side. Now, from where I was sat, this looked like a clear handball by Adama Traore, as in he was near the goal line, the ball dropped and he tried to kind of chest/stomach it, but because the ball dipped, it did, as far as I could tell, hit his hand. There's a big shout for handball. Play went on. Wolves went down the other end. They won a corner, a last-ditch bit of defending, I think, from Steve Cook. And as they were waiting to take their corner, the ref said, hold on. On the screen, VAR checking possible penalty. And they said, checking possible penalty for foul. And once again, the ref, after a long, long, long wait, gets called over to the screen, and he has a look at it for quite a while. And he takes his time. And then the penalty is given. Now, I thought it was a penalty for the handball by Traore. I thought it was as clear-cut as you could wish to see. It was just a question of whether the camera angles would show it. It turns out it was nothing to do with that. I have no idea if, no one even looked at the handball shout, because Mateus Nunes had pulled down Ryan Yates in the penalty area. And again, they looked at it for a long time for something which actually, on the replay, once you see it, it's like you can't unsee it.
Exactly, yeah. Very clear cut, wasn't it, in the end? And yeah,
Why did it even need to go for the ref to look at the screen in that case?
I was not sure about that. That's a decision that VAR officials in Stockley Park should be able to see and just give it, surely. Unless they want to give some credibility to the referee and say, go and have a look and make the decision for yourself. But yeah, that was a long wait for a decision which was actually quite clear cut, because the guy has got hold of Yates, he's got his shirt, he's got his arms, everything, and hauling him back. And on the commentary that I was watching, Don Hutchinson was co-com, and he said, if I'm Ryan Yates in that position, I'm going down.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to argue with that, because if he doesn't go down there, then it's not given, and it probably doesn't go to VAR, and it's not given a second chance to be checked. So, yeah, I think from our point of view, it was a clear penalty, and good work from Ryan Yates, actually, winning it and making sure that was seen, if you like. Yeah,
and in a weekend where Marco Silva made the point that the Mitrovic penalty, where Jefferson Lerma tackled him in the box, well, it's one of those where the ref wouldn't have given it if Mitrovic hadn't gone down. But if you look at other decisions that are given across the league, then it has to be given as a penalty, which is the point that Marco Silva made. And of course, Gary O'Neill had his opinion, as you'd expect. But this is a very, very clear pen. But because of the long wait, and of course, Jose Sarr then took his time, and Brennan Johnson was waiting. Now, we've seen Brennan take a lot of good penalties. We've seen him take one or two poor ones as well. How did you feel? Did you feel confident?
I wasn't sure, to be honest with you. I don't think Brennan's been in the best of form, and I was a little bit concerned with him taking the penalty. Didn't look as confident as I thought he normally does, and yeah, I wasn't as confident as I had been with his penalty against Bournemouth, and it did prove to be true, sadly, from Forest's point of view.
So, call me Mr. Optimistic. I was hoping that, having had not just a poor match, but a poor couple of matches, really, that this could give Brennan that little injection of confidence. Now, was it a good save? Was it a poor penalty, or a bit of both?
It was, for me, a poor penalty. I think it's got to go in the corner. And again, it comes back to the goalkeeper. If the goalkeeper's been struggling this week with injury, as reports suggest, just fire the penalty hard and put it into a corner. Make it as difficult for him as possible to make the save. It was a good save, but it was in a good spot for him. And he got his positioning right. He just left his foot on the line so he could sort of dive forward slightly and across. So he's done well there. But I'm looking at that penalty and thinking Brennan should have aimed it more at the corner and made it more difficult for the keeper.
Yeah. So Jose Sarr did say in his post-match interview, I knew who's going to hit it to my left. So maybe Brennan was too easy to read, or his penalties are too predictable. I don't know, shades of Lewis Grabban there, I don't know. But also, on the big screen, they did briefly flash up the kind of goal line angle. So I did wonder if they were looking at whether Sarr had left his line too early. But I don't think there was any issue there in the end. Okay, so Forest missed their golden chance to get back in the match, and then they brought on Taiwo Awoniyi in place of Remo Freuler, so that saw Forest go 4-4-2 with Johnson and Awoniyi up front, Gibbs, White and Lingard on the wings. And in a last throw of the dice, they put on Sam Surridge on for Harry Toffolo, which essentially meant that they went 2-3-5. Now, there were a couple of efforts. So there was an effort that came to Mangala on outside the box, and he just snatched it in. He had loads of time and space, but he just tried to go for the first time volley, and it basically went into orbit. And then right at the death, there was a ball into the box from a set piece. Steve Cook headed it back firmly across the goal, and then Yates, he just got underneath it, so it hit the roof of the net, and that was, I suppose, if the Johnson penalty was the chance, then that was the last shot at redemption, really, wasn't it? So it ended 1-0 to Wolverhampton Wanderers.
The 1865 Match Report.
You're listening to the 1865 Match Report. We are happy to be joined now by Matt Langham, who's a Wolverhampton Wanderers fan, with his thoughts on the game.
A few thoughts here from a Wolves fan coming in peace. Not a particularly brilliant game yesterday. Wolves had all the play in the first half. Jose Sarr could have pulled up a lawn chair really and read the paper. There was nothing for him to do. But equally, from a Wolves perspective, it was the same old thing. Good technical play, good possession, up to the final third, and then really not much going on. Had Costa in the middle on his Zimmer frame. Didn't really do much to affect the game, although he is a bit of a pain. And then in the second half, a bit more harem-scarum. I thought both penalties were probably right on balance, and it was about the only thing the referee got right. Because he got nothing else right. All the calls that he made seemed perplexing at times otherwise. Free kicks that weren't free kicks. But, he was equally bad for both sides, so fair's fair. I can't understand people saying that the Forest penalty wasn't a penalty. To me, it was a clear pull. I've got a bigger issue with the fact that Totti just shanked it out of play under no pressure to give the corner away in the first place. But there you go. Really valuable 3 points for Wolves. Delighted with that. Performances will hopefully come in time. From a Forest point of view, I think it's a tougher league this year. Last year there were maybe one or two teams that you thought were doomed quite early, notably Norwich. This season, I don't see the league as being that easy to escape relegation from. I think all teams from in the bottom half, it's a cliche, anyone can beat anyone else. So are Forest doomed? No. Steve Cooper is a guy that I really like. Whenever I've seen an interview with him or read anything from him, he seems genuinely inspiring. Fair play to Forest for sticking with their guy. He worked miracles last year, let's face it, after what I think was the worst start in over 100 years, if I'm not wrong in saying that. So nothing short of a miraculous season last year, and the guy deserves more time. Hopefully build the relationships on the pitch. And Forest, a team I've always quite liked, will hopefully live to fight another day and stay up.
Okay, thank you very much, Matt. Now, Stephen, you're back with us. Now, this match felt really bad, and like me, you feel a little bit calmer this morning. The other thing that helped with that wasn't just watching Match of the Day, and Jermaine Genius, okay, he's a Forest boy and all that, and he's, you can have your own opinions on the quality of his punditry, but he said that actually there were signs there that Forest, if they can just gel, that they have got something okay going on.
My criticism of the game, if anything, was that we didn't test Wolves enough. We didn't have enough shots at goal. We didn't have enough quality in the final third to create chances and those opportunities that we needed to score goals. And we relied on essentially what was a set piece for an opportunity with the penalty. Same again with the Yates efforts, ball into the box, header across, and it's Yates who heads over the bar. So that's my big concern, is more that we need to do more in attack and actually test teams more going forward.
Funny, as you're mentioning that, I was just thinking to myself, I have no idea what the goalkeeping stats say, but I think that Jose Sarr's penalty save was probably the only save from a direct shot that either keeper made in the entire match. It was not a game, there were plenty of opportunities, if I put it that way, but Adama Traore epitomises that. He's either brilliant or he's absolutely hopeless, and he had quite a few efforts where he ended up putting crosses into the stand and so on. And it was the same with both teams having their efforts on goal. They just didn't do enough to get the efforts on target, I don't think. You mentioned Steve Cooper. he said, we've not looked after the ball well enough in the first half. We didn't show enough bravery and technique. Now, he's very keen on those kinds of, I suppose, things to do with attitude and nuance. He also said, I haven't seen the penalty back, but the less said about the referee's performance today, the better. I'm pretty sure it would have been a different decision if it was at the other end. And he did then temper that by saying, but we need to look at ourselves first. He talked about the coaching challenge he's got. He certainly didn't blame the players. He has, he's taken this on his own shoulders.
But it is interesting listening, or it was listening to him on Radio Nottingham afterwards. The interview finished and they threw back to Charlie Slater, who then 30 seconds later asked a question to Colin Fray about the interview he'd just done with Steve Cooper. And Colin Fray said he seemed a bit downbeat, Steve Cooper, and it wasn't quite his normal self. Now, I wonder if he felt that was an opportunity missed at Molineux and that we should have done more to try and win the game. And I think he's taking some of the pressure off the players there with the comments about the referee. There was an opportunity there, I think, for us to do more in the game and to try and win it. And we've not taken that. And I think that's the big disappointment. And I got the impression from Steve Cooper that he was really disappointed with that as well.
Yeah. Talking about players, we do need to talk about Forest's number 20, Brennan Johnson. He has looked lacking in confidence. His decision-making and composure, as we alluded to earlier, are not always at the level required. And he's increasingly, when he's getting the ball, he's running with his head down, which is something you can get away with at championship level a lot more because you can basically head towards the goal and have a go. But defenders are bigger and stronger and faster in the Premier League, and he's finding himself getting crowded out. And for me, there was a moment in the first half, sure, the weather was topsy-turvy, so had just thrown it down with rain, and then the sun had come out. He got the ball in space on the right-hand side. He ran forward 20 yards, and then under no real pressure, ended up kicking it out of play when he should have easily stayed within the boundaries of the pitch. Towards the end of the second half, he got down the left-hand side. He took on his defenders, and he's looking, I'm going to do this. Gets past them and then ends up basically doing a powder puff outside of the right foot effort, which kind of goes weakly wide when he should have been putting the ball with his left foot into the box. Is it time to take Brennan Johnson out of the firing line, give him a rest, maybe take the chance to, put a one-knee up front and put Dennis on the wings, or maybe Sam Surridge, something like that? I can understand the logic for saying give Brennan a chance and he'll keep going. But I'm wondering if now's the time to take him out. What do you think?
I think he's struggling. He's struggling to make an impact in games and have those moments that he used to have in the Championship. I think we could, in the league below, carry Brennan a little bit because his pace and his directness would make things happen. And he could not be involved in a game for a long time, but then the ball comes to him and he will just beat a man, drive into the box and make something happen. He's struggling to do that now in the Premier League. I think, as you're alluding to there, defenders are savvier. They don't have to necessarily be quick to keep up with Brennan. The positioning's better. They read the game a lot better. And I think that has really affected Brennan's sort of his impact in games. And I think we are at a point with him where it's good. I think it's beneficial to take him out the firing line and maybe use him as an impact player from the bench to stretch games.
Yeah, and I don't want to get caught up in all the kind of, again, the lack of nuance that exists both from fans at the ground in the heat of the moment and then people on social media in the heat of the moment. But I would also say that in the first half, I mentioned that Ryan Nuri had two of the kind of strongest efforts on goal, or he should have had two efforts on goal, really. And I found myself thinking, poor Nico, it's like playing with 10 men. Nico Williams was horrifically upstaged, because if you look at the other flank, Gibbs White's not the best defender, but he was tracking back. He was doing his best to help out Harry Toffolo. And if it weren't for the fact that Adama Traore is really, really good at dribbling and taking on his man, on the other side, Ait Nouri was able... Williams were looking after Podence, and therefore it was really important that Johnson tracked back, and he just wasn't doing that as he should have been. And I think that that's as much of a concern. You can, like you say, you can carry a player in the Championship because he offers that kind of danger on the break. It's not been happening that way recently with Brennan. So I think that there's a big question mark there. Now, let's break away from that for a few minutes and let's go over to the 1865 news desk.
Hi, this is Callum with the 1865 news. Another busy week at Nottingham Forest. We said it wasn't going to slow down too much, but it all started with a Daniel Taylor article for The Athletic, which was the story of Evangelos Marinakis, which was really, really, really great article, went really in depth with the way he operates basically from a young age until now. Talks about his father, talks about his son's involvement, and how things have been basically with Dane Murphy and Steve Cooper and everything like that. So well worth the read. It also did say that the head of recruitment, George Sirianos, and head scout Andy Scott would be looking to lose their jobs, which they did effectively quite quickly after that. So it looks like the replacements are being looked at the moment. And then also Daniel Taylor was involved in a podcast for The Athletic with Paul Taylor and Nick Miller that was discussing all sorts of bits again about Forest. But the main key point that they looked at was that Thomas Tuchel and Maurizio Pochettino were two managers that Marinakis and the team were looking at to replace Steve Cooper at the time when the rumours were around, and that they were having a look about, and they were quite quickly shut down basically. And that's where the list with Sean Dyche, Nuno Espirito Santo came about, everything like that. Another bit of news, Steve Cooper announced that Niakate is nowhere near returning, which is a bit of a dent. Looked like he was doing well with Senegal, but looks like it's not any closer to a return. And but he also did say that Emmanuel Dennis had a few knocks, which will explain why he didn't have too many minutes at the start of the season, but then obviously started his first Premier League game and got his first goal. Thank you very much, and I'll be back with the news soon.
Thank you very much, Callum. Now, Stephen, we've only got a couple of minutes left in this podcast, so just one thing I want to pick up on from Callum's news roundup: the sackings of George Sirianos and Andy Scott. Those don't look good in terms of what's happening behind the scenes at the club in terms of cohesion and unity and strategy, do they?
No, it is a move that has got rid of two people who were instrumental, I think, in helping Forest build a squad that got them out of the Championship last season. The change in approach as well that was spearheaded by Dane Murphy. I think the likes of Sirianos and Andy Scott helped to put some of that into action with a certain profile of player that they were looking at and bringing in. And it does seem like we've given them the chop and kind of said, well, your work wasn't good enough. Now, I think Sirianos has been involved in the Bundesliga transfers. Obviously, that's his background. That's where he's operated before, so he knows that league. I think Oral Mangala's been a good signing, which he's just not been able to get on the pitch as often as we want him to. And Taiwo Awoniyi's been a decent signing too so far. He's got an okay return of goals from his minutes on the pitch, and yeah, he looks like he's got something to offer. So I am a little bit concerned by this. My only counter to it is that Dane Murphy and Steve Cooper are still there, and I'm assuming will be involved in the process of bringing in replacements for Scott and Sirianos. So with that in mind, hopefully it won't be as disruptive a move as it perhaps would have been had all four of them gone and the whole recruitment team was ripped up and started again.
Yeah, so I think it's worth noting that Sirianos, I think it's pretty clear that he was, because he's apparently close to Dane Murphy, he was obviously getting involved in maybe in an advisory capacity even before he had a role at the City Ground. Andy Scott is somebody who's close to Steve Cooper. I can't help but feeling that there were two transfer strategies in place over the summer. There was the initial phase of buying these players who are kind of, 25 and under, with the occasional kind of player like Lingard coming in and so on and so forth, to add a little bit of experience. And then there was the kind of the signings of the Auriers and the Bollies and, the older players, which, I'm not going to call them panic buys because that's not fair. But it seemed like there were two strategies going on, and we seem to think that Sirianos and Scott may have been instrumental in the younger players coming in, and yet they seem to be fall guys, don't they?
Yeah, they do. And that's a concern, because I hope it doesn't mean that we're looking to go to the old approach of just signing any players that are available and getting fleeced by agents, bringing in 30 players over the age of 30 on big wages who don't have as much to offer, because for 4 years that approach didn't work in the Championship. It certainly won't work in the Premier League if we think that that's going to be the way to go. So that's why I'm hopeful that despite Andy Scott being Steve Cooper's guy, despite Sirianos and Dane Murphy having a close working relationship, that Murphy and Cooper are still there and that they will have a say in the replacements, and hopefully doesn't cause too much disruption to our recruitment and the way that we find players.
Okay, we'll leave it there for today. Had a lot to talk about there. I will also just mention that if people are leaving the club, I have a feeling that there's going to be somebody who deals with the graphic design for Forest social media who will be quaking in their boots this morning. But I want to say a big thank you to Steven Toplis. I want to say thank you to Callum for the news roundup, and also to Matt Langham for the Wolves viewpoint. The next matchup is against Brighton away on Tuesday. That's going to be a tough cookie. We'll be back after the game. Thank you very much for listening to the 1865 Match Report.
Social Podcast Network.
Prize Picks is daily fantasy sports made easy. All you have to do is pick the over-under on 2 or more players, then you're set in 60 seconds or less. You can win up to 10 times your money. Didn't get your picks in before the game started? No problem. You can get in the game for the second half. Sign up today using promo code FOOTBALL and get your first deposit instantly matched up to $100. Go to prizepicks.com or download the mobile app and enter code FOOTBALL to get your deposit match. Some restrictions do apply. See the website for details.